Today we'll talk about the seventh topic is the endocrine system. So what is endocrinology? Endocrinology actually is concerned with the study of the biosynthesis, storage, chemistry, and the physiological function of hormones with the cells of the endocrine glands and tissues that secrete them. So basically it is a studying of hormones and the gland which secrete these hormones. So what are the endocrine organs? These organs are scattered throughout the body and devoted only for the secretion of hormones. So hormones are released from these endocrine glands, which is ductless gland. We'll understand in the next few slides what is ductless gland. And these hormones circulate in the blood until reaching to the target organ. To speed up, once reach to the target organ, it speeds up or slow down or alter the activity of these organs. All multicellular organisms need a coordinating system to regulate and integrate the function of cells. These coordination require the receptors that sense the stimuli and pass the information to the effector. So three major definitions: receptor, stimuli, and the effector. So one of the two major effectors in our human body, is the muscles and the glands. So the effector, the muscle, can respond either by contracting or relaxation. And the gland as well can respond as an effector organ, either by stimulating the secretion of a hormone or even an enzyme. Most animals have two methods of sending information, from receptors to effector. So once the stimuli is sensed, the receptor can send the signal to the effector via two routes: either fast method by nerve through the nervous system, or the slow method by hormones by the endocrine system. Once a hormone finished its function in the body, hormones are changed by liver into inactive compounds that is excreted by kidneys after performing its function. So here we can see a general difference between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So basically the nervous system consists of neurons, while the endocrine system consists of glands. Electrical impulse is a type of information conveyed in the nervous system, while chemicals, which is actually hormones, is a type of information of endocrine system. The nervous system conveys its information through the nerve fibers, while the endocrine system, the hormones are carried through the blood plasma and dissolved in the blood plasma. The transmission speed in nervous system is very rapid, while it's a slow transmission in endocrine system. For nervous system, it have a short-term effect for the action, while for the endocrine system, it have long-term effect. The target area for the nervous system is localized, and actually it is at the end of the neuron, while the target area for the endocrine system is dispersed throughout the body. The feedback mechanism. What's a feedback mechanism? That's mean how we shut off the signal, how the body shut off the signal. Actually, in nervous system, it is absent. While the endocrine system, there is a feedback mechanism to shut the secretion of the hormone. In this table, we will see the difference between an endocrine gland, which is a ductless gland, and the exocrine gland, which is the digestive gland. Actually, the endocrine gland are glands that have no duct, while exocrine glands with duct. Endocrine glands secrete hormones, while the exocrine glands secrete either mucus, majorly enzymes, mucus, or acid, like the acid of the stomach. For endocrine glands, the secretion is directly to the blood since there is no duct, while for the exocrine, the secretion don't pass to the blood because it moves through the duct. here we can see the different endocrine organs that present in our body. Starting with the hypothalamus, it's an organ, it's an endocrine gland that's situated in the brain above the pituitary gland, one of the major endocrine glands in our body and especially in brain. And this pituitary gland secretes a lot of hormones through the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. This is followed by thyroid gland, which secrete thyroxine and calcitonin. Then the thymus gland, which secrete thymoxines. Then the adrenal gland, which is located on top of each kidney and consists of medulla and cortex, adrenal medulla and adrenal cortex. And both of these regions or zones secrete specific hormones. One of the major famous hormone is the adrenaline, which is epinephrine, same name, secreted by the adrenal medulla. Then we have the pancreas islet cells. The pancreas, which majorly secrete two very important hormones, is the insulin and glucagon, which control the blood sugar level. Then we have the pineal gland, which secrete the melatonin, one of the important hormones that control the sleeping behavior. Then we have the parathyroid gland, which is located on top of the thyroid gland, and of course it secretes the parathyroid hormone. And surprisingly, we have the heart that can secrete a peptide that behaves as a hormone, which is called atrial natriuretic peptide. We have as well the kidney that secretes the erythropoietin, and we have the digestive tract, which secretes a lot of hormones as well. We have the fat dispersed all over our body, which secrete leptin hormone that have been linked to obesity. Then we have another major gland in our body, either the testis or the ovary, which secrete the sex hormones. Here you can see how the pituitary gland, this is the pituitary gland, located beneath the hypothalamus, and you can see you have anterior pituitary region and posterior pituitary gland. You can see that for the anterior, it secretes thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulate the thyroid gland to thyroid hormone. And the other anterior pituitary as well can secrete the adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which stimulate the adrenal cortex of the adrenal gland to secrete its hormone. As well, the anterior pituitary gland secrete one of the major hormone, which is the growth hormone, and actually this growth hormone can stimulate or affect a lot of target organs like bone and muscles. As well, the anterior pituitary secrete the gonadotropin and FSH and LH hormone, which affect the behavior and the activity of the gonads, the testes and the ovary. As well, the anterior pituitary gland secrete one of the important hormone is the prolactin hormone, and this prolactin hormone induce the secretion of milk in the mammary glands of mammals. As well, the anterior pituitary gland secrete the melanocyte stimulating hormone, which induce the secretion, the secretion of melanin from the melanocytes in amphibia. So these are the major hormone that is secreted from the anterior pituitary gland and the organs that these hormones affect. For the posterior pituitary region or part of the pituitary gland, only secrete two major hormones and two very important hormones. The antidiuretic hormone, ADH, which regulate the kidney tubules to reabsorb water in case there is a dehydration, so that in order the body not to lose a lot of water. And as well, the posterior pituitary gland secrete oxytocin, which will affect the muscle of the uterus to contract during delivery of the baby. So the contraction of the uterine wall during delivery of babies is triggered or stimulated by the effect of the oxytocin, which is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. So you can see now that actually the pituitary gland is secreting a lot of hormones, and which controls a lot of organs or target organs throughout our body. So that's why the pituitary gland is called the master gland in our body. So if we talk about hormones, so what are hormones? Hormones, actually, it's a biologically active substance secreted by glands. These hormones have the effect of either being endocrine, paracrine, or autocrine. So what's the difference? So the difference is, for endocrine, the hormone has the effect far away from the site of its secretion, while paracrine hormones have a biological effect to nearby cells or organ. While the autocrine, the hormone have a local effect, even even local effect, or even on the same cell that secretes the hormone. For the hormone function, we have hormones that regulate the function of growth and development, like the thyroid, growth hormone, sex steroid, and cortisol. While hormone affecting the function of reproduction, especially estrogen, testosterone, FSH, LH, thyroid. While hormones regulate homeostasis, majorly the thyroid hormones and cortisol. These, which affected the changes in environment, as well, called cortisol and aldosterone. Hormone can be classified either protein in nature, mainly consists of amino acids or steroids. Protein in nature examples: thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, insulin, parathyroid hormone. While for amino acid, it's like the epinephrine, which is actually the adrenaline, and the thyroid hormone. For the steroids, the example is cortisol, aldosterone, testosterone. The mechanism of action of hormones, actually, the hormone is secreted from the endocrine gland, and they circulate in the bloodstream by a transporter proteins or free. So some hormones need a protein to transport that hormone to the target organ. Other hormone transport in the blood free without the help of another transport protein. This hormone actually is, the free hormones is actually the active hormone. Once this hormone reach its target cell, they will have its biological activity. So here we can see actually how the hormone is released, distributed, and got received by the target organ. So you can see initially that any endocrine cell release hormone directly, this hormone directly enters the blood. So you can see it is direct. So that's why these glands have named endocrine, because they directly secrete the endocrine hormone into the blood. So this blood carries the hormone through the whole body. This hormone, once reach the target area, this hormone leaves the capillary and diffuse, as you can see from the figure, diffuse from the blood capillary to reach the affected cells of the target organ. So you can see there is a receptors on the cells, for example, of the uterus, which will, for example, the oxytocin hormone, which affected the contractility of the uterine muscles. So you can see that receptor of the muscle cells on the uterus bind to the hormone. Once this hormone bound to the receptor, it will affect the target organ. In this example, it will affect, for example, the contraction of the uterine muscles. As well, some kind other hormones, different hormone can reach another different target organ. So you can see it's a different receptor. So different, although it's a different receptor, but it is compatible with the kind of hormone. So once the hormone bound to the receptor, it will affect. So you can see here for this figure as well, it shows that the same hormone cannot bind to a different receptor. So that's why it will not affect any other effector organ or a target organ. It only affects the organ which is having the receptor that is matching with the hormone. So you can see here the hormone didn't bind with the receptor. So here we will summarize the 4 major methods of cell-to-cell communication, which are found in our human body, and they range from direct to remote communication. So for direct communication, actually the cells communicate directly, and this is very useful for chemical messengers like ions and small molecules, in which the molecules move directly between 2 cells. And the major example of this direct communication is the ions that flow in the cardiac muscles cells. While the second way of communication is the synaptic communication, in which the neurons, you can see, neuron secrete substances, the green ones, which is called the neurotransmitters. The major example of neurotransmitter is the acetylcholine. This neurotransmitter moves and then bound to the target cell to initiate a response. So actually synaptic transmission or synaptic communication, it's only related to the neurons. While the third way of communication is a paracrine, in which these cells affect nearby cells, not far away. So there is no bloodstream intermediate involved. So actually these are very useful for local hormones. The major example is the prostaglandins hormones. The one we are dealing with it majorly in our lecture today is the endocrine signaling. In endocrine signaling, you can see that, as we have just said, that the hormone is secreted from the endocrine gland or cell directly into the blood, and the blood carries the hormone into far regions or far target areas for its action. And it is the perfect method for hormone communication. And the major example of course, of that is insulin. So how the hormones are classified? So actually hormones are classified into 3 major criteria, either anatomic or chemical, or according to its chemical composition, or according to its solubility. So you can see here, according to anatomical source, so basically some hormones come from the hypothalamus, like the growth hormone releasing hormone, the gonadotropin releasing hormone, and the growth hormone inhibiting hormone, and the corticotropin releasing hormone, and thyrotropin releasing hormone, in addition to the prolactin releasing factor and the prolactin inhibiting factor. Other hormones are released from the anterior pituitary gland. We have said this hormone in previous slides. The ACTH, TSH, MSH, GH, prolactin, FSH, and LH. Other hormones are secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. As we said, majorly 2 kinds of hormone only are secreted from the posterior pituitary gland, which is the antidiuretic hormone ADH and oxytocin. While hormones secreted from the thyroid gland, the famous hormones, thyroid hormones, is the T3 and T4 hormones, and the calcitonin, which regulate the amount of calcium in our body. For the parathyroid gland, it secretes parathyroid hormone. The adrenal gland, of course, we said that it consists of 2 zones or 2 regions, adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Basically, adrenal cortex is involved by the secretion of a steroid hormone like cortisol and aldosterone, while the adrenal medulla majorly secrete the adrenaline, which is epinephrine, and the noradrenaline, which is the norepinephrine. The kidney secrete some major hormone, which is the erythropoietin, vitamin D3 hormone, renin, angiotensin 1. While the pancreas, of course, secrete two very important and major hormone, which is antagonistic hormone, the insulin and the glucagon. The gonads secrete the sex hormones, including, as example, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So these are the first criteria of classification, actually based on the anatomical source, or in other words, based on where the hormone is secreted from. The other criteria of classification is according to chemical composition. So hormone is either peptide hormone, like the hypothalamus, anterior and posterior, all the anterior and posterior gland hormones, the pancreatic hormone, the parathyroid hormone and calcitonin, the kidney hormones are all peptide hormones. Other hormones are amine hormones, which actually they're all derived from the amino acid tyrosine, like the thyroid hormone, the adrenaline, noradrenaline, and the PIH, prolactin inhibiting hormone. The third class of hormones classified according to chemical composition is the steroid hormone. And they are actually derived from cholesterol, like the sex hormones from the gonads and the placenta, all the adrenal cortex hormone, and vitamin D3 hormone. The third criteria of classification is according to solubility. So hormones is either water-soluble hormones, which is hydrophilic hormones, or fat-soluble hormones, which is hydrophobic hormone. Actually, the hydrophobic hormone are all the steroid hormone, while the hydrophilic hormones are all the peptide hormones and all the amine hormones except the thyroid hormones. So, how hormones are regulated? Hormones interact with the receptor on the target cell depending on the type of hormone, okay? Either it's a hydrophilic hormone or a hydrophobic hormone. So for hydrophilic hormone, they act on the plasma membrane receptors, while for hydrophobic hormone, they act on a different kind of receptor, which is either cytoplasmic or nuclear receptor. So the physiological effect of the hormone depend on their concentration in the blood and the extracellular fluid. And the diseases result when hormone concentration are either too high or too low. So it needs to be tightly regulated into an optimum concentration. The concentrations of hormone is required to control most of the metabolic and endocrine function are incredibly small. Their concentration of the blood, the hormone concentration, ranges from 1 picogram to few microgram per milliliter of blood. And these concentrations of hormone, as seen by the target cells, majorly depend on the three factors: the rate of production, how much the hormone, the amount of hormone synthesis, and which is controlled to be either positive feedback or a negative feedback. A positive feedback that enhances its secretion, and the negative feedback that decreases its secretion. And as well, the rate of delivery, how fast the hormone reaches the target organ. And as well, the rate of degradation and elimination, how fast, what is the rate that the hormone is cleared from the blood. Any disturbance in the feedback loop that control the amount or the concentration of the hormone in the blood is a very clinically important, and their significance in diagnosis is pivotal, because most of the disease that concerned with the endocrine function can be diagnosed by the abnormal level of hormones in the blood. You need to know that the negative feedback is much more common than the positive feedback. So circuits that decrease the amount of hormones in the blood are more common than the feedback which increase the amount of hormone in the blood. As an example here, You can see here the hypothalamus, which is a gland, endocrine gland in the brain, secrete a hormone, which is a releasing hormone, that stimulates, for example, the anterior pituitary gland to secrete a second hormone, which is a stimulating hormone, that affect a target organ, which lead to this target organ to secrete a third type of hormone, which is named, it's a target hormone from the target organ. So this actually the normal mechanism, the typical mechanism of hormone that is triggered initially by the hypothalamus. You can see that there is a negative feedback on a first level to affect this feedback will affect and will shut down the release of a stimulating hormone 2, which in turn will shut down the release of hormone 3. And this negative feedback will arise when the hormone 3 have finished its function and it is no longer needed. So the increasing concentration of that hormone, hormone 3, will shut down the secretion on the level of the anterior pituitary. While there is another level which actually affect a higher level, which on the hypothalamus. And actually this level of negative feedback will shut the releasing hormone 1, which in turn shut down anterior pituitary gland, which in turn shut down the target gland from releasing its hormones. So you can see here there is two negative feedback mechanisms controlling just one hormone, as in our example, hormone 3. Let's see some actually what's happening inside our body. So in cases where there are a dehydration, these can be sensed by receptors in the hypothalamus that can detect the blood osmolarity, because osmolarity of the blood changes when the amount of water decreases markedly in the blood. And of course, you know that the hypothalamus is existing in the brain above the pituitary. Once the receptor of the hypothalamus detects this increased blood osmolarity, the hypothalamus causes the sensation of thirst. This will lead to drinking a lot of water to compensate, and then the blood osmolarity is restored. In the hypothalamus as well, it can affect the amount of water in the blood by stimulating the posterior pituitary gland to release ADH, the antidiuretic hormone. So this antidiuretic hormone will increase the water reabsorption through the kidney tubule. So they collect more water to the body instead of losing that water in the urine. And both these two processes will help in regulating and restoration of the blood osmolarity into normal. So what happened now when the body have recovered from this dehydration? So in need, this as well is sensed, the normal osmolarity can be sensed by the hypothalamic receptor to shut off all these routes in order not to be in order not to have a lot of water reabsorbed into our blood. So you can see here the red arrow represent a negative feedback which can regulate the amount of ADH and the thirst we feel once the osmolarity is restored to normal. Another famous example is the normal blood sugar level and how the body regulates this normal blood sugar level. So normally it's around 70 to 110 milligram glucose per 100 ml blood. So that's the normal blood glucose level. Once there is a blood glucose level rises, increases as after eating, the pancreas and especially the beta cells of pancreas sense that and it starts secreting one of the major hormone is the insulin. The insulin actually will affect the body, some target organs, especially you can see the liver, and you can see as well cells that store the glycogen in liver and the muscles, for example. This will break down glycogen and release the glucose back. This insulin will target this organ to extract this glucose from the blood and store it in liver and the muscles, for example, and this lead to decrease of the blood glucose level in order to reach into the normal level of glucose in the blood. So this circuit explains the how the insulin hormone will lowers the blood sugar level. While in case if the blood sugar level falls, the process is reversed by the help of the alpha cells of the pancreas, which secrete glucagon. So actually, glucagon will promote the release, the broke down of the glycogen stored in the liver in order to release glucose in the blood to restore the normal blood glucose level. So as you can see, two major hormones play an important role in regulating the blood sugar level in our body, insulin and glucagon. Here as well, another example of the prolactin. So it starts with baby start suckling of the mammary gland. This suckling stimulates the sensory receptors in the breast, which send information through the nerve impulse. It will send information to the hypothalamus. This hypothalamus, once receive the information, the neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus will send signal to the posterior pituitary gland to release the oxytocin. The oxytocin released from this oxytocin released from the posterior pituitary gland will bind to receptors on the milky gland muscles to stimulate the contraction of these muscles to release the milk out so the baby can feed. So this circuit is very important in breastfeeding. So again, it starts with suckling of the baby to the through the nipple from the breast. This will stimulate the sensory receptor, which sends signal via nerves to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus start to order the posterior pituitary gland to release the oxytocin, which is carried by the blood to the milky gland, and milky gland have muscles, and the receptors of oxytocin are on the muscles. This receptor, once bound to the oxytocin, it will contract to release the milk for the baby. Okay, so now we got three examples to show one of the effect of dehydration and how the body regulates the amount of water in our body. The other example is how body regulates the blood sugar level, and the third example how the breastfeeding is regulated by hormone action. Here you can see a table summarize the endocrine gland, the hormone that it releases, the type of chemical according to the chemical structure, and the principal function. And actually this table, as you can see, you can have it for knowledge as well. This is the rest of the table. So basically these two tables is very useful in summarize all the hormone and the target organs and the chemical nature and the principal function. And we already said most of these tables in the previous slides. The last thing in the endocrine system is endocrine disease. So endocrine disease fell actually into 5 broad categories. So why there is a disease occurring? So the disease is occurring when there is a fail in either hormone overproduction, so a lot of hormone is produced, that's mean a hyperfunction of the gland, or either hormone underproduction, that's mean the gland is not sufficiently secreting enough hormone to regulate the function. Or disease can arise from altered tissue response to hormone. So that's mean when a muscle receives hormone, it's not contracting the proper way it needs to contract. When a gland or a target organ receive the hormone and interact with hormone, it is not responding as normal, altered tissue response. While another class of endocrine diseases result from tumors that happen to the endocrine gland, as well as hormone deficiency may lead to endocrine disease. Now we'll talk about the next topic, which is the nervous system. For the nervous system, the function actually of the nervous system is controlled actually by the function of the neuron, which are localized in a separate part of the body. So the nervous system contains two principal cell types, either neurons or glia. A neuron is a very highly specialized cell, and the typical neuron is consists of four major structures: dendrites, cell body, axon, and synaptic terminal. So these four structures perform four main functions of the neuron. Actually, they receive information from internal and external environment or from other neurons. They process this information and they produce an electrical signal. They conduct this signal to a junction where neuron meets with other cells, and they transmit the information to other cells or other neurons or other muscle or glands. So basically, these are the four functions of the nervous system. So here you can see how the neuron is composed of. Actually, this is a real image of a neuron, and you can see it starts with the dendrites that receive the signal from other neurons. The signal is conveyed to the cell body, which integrate and coordinate these signals. This leads to the formation of what is called action potential. And action potential, which actually the propagation of the nerve impulse, it starts by the cell body. This action potential move through the axon of the neuron, and this axon conduct this action potential until reaching to the synaptic terminal. In synaptic terminal, this terminal release a very important chemical compound, which actually the neurotransmitter. This neurotransmitter is secreting by the regions of the terminal regions of the dendrites to convey the signal for another target cell, either other neuron, muscle, or gland. So basically, again, it starts the signal received by the dendrites, moved to the cell body, which integrate the signal, action potential, or the start of the nerve impulse arise from the cell body that is conducted through the axon, reaching to the synaptic terminals, which is formed mainly of the dendrite that release the neurotransmitter, and this neurotransmitter is released to be attached to a receptor on the target cell. Here again, you can see the structure and function of the neuron. Again, it's another illustration of the principle. So you can see action potential start here, leaving the cell body. This action potential reaches the synaptic region. Actually, this region is enlarged region of a terminal of a dendrite. As you can see, it is enlarged region. This positive charge of the action potential have a positive charge, causes the synaptic vesicle to be released from the end of the dendrites into a space called synaptic cleft. This neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft will bound to a receptor on the postsynaptic neuron. So that means the neuron after the synaptic cleft. Once this neurotransmitter bound to that neuron, this neurotransmitter binding will cause some channels to open to get ions to be internalized. So you can see the red dot here. Actually, it is the neurotransmitter which is released from the end of the neuron. Once these channels open, it will trigger an action in the target cell. This neurotransmitter is either taken back or degraded, because it's important to degrade this neurotransmitter, otherwise the signal will not be shut off. So it needs either to be degraded or taken back into the synaptic terminal. In either cases, this neurotransmitter needs to be removed from the synaptic cleft once the action is done. So here you can see the propagation of the action potential. So the information within a neuron is carried by electrical signals. And in inactive neuron maintains, as you can see from the figure, maintains a constant electrical voltage or potential across its plasma membrane, which is called resting potential. And this resting potential range from -40 to -90. So you can see the level is resting potential. Once the neuron is stimulated, the voltage inside the neuron become either negative or less negative. Okay? If the potential becomes sufficiently less negative, it will reach a level, as you can see the dashed line here, it's a level called threshold level. And once reached this threshold level, it will triggers into an action potential. And actually this is the highest level of the nerve impulse. And actually the action potential which can be propagated. And normally action potential is reached when the neuron voltage across the plasma membrane is plus 50 millivolt. An action potential is soon lost only for a few seconds and back again into resting potential once the stimulus is moved from region of the axon to another region on the same axon. So here you can see that the neurons, actually the axons is covered by very important material, which is the myelin, which in this myelin covering the axon in general, the thicker the axon, that means a thick layer of myelin, the faster of action of potential. The myelin is basically, it is a fatty in nature. So this insulation of the axon will speed up the conduction of the signal through the axon. And the myelin actually is formed by the other type of the cells of the nervous system, which is the glial cells. These cells wrap themselves and form the myelin around the axons, leaving space, you can see, leaving space that is uncovered. These spaces are called nodes. And actually, these nodes are naked regions of the axon. So in an axon, actually with myelin covering, the action potential travel continuously, but fairly with a slowly speed, 1 to 2 meters per second. In contrast, action potential in myelinated axons, the first one is without myelin. The second one, if there is a myelinated axon, the action potential or the nerve impulse moves as fast as 100 meters per second. So in these two cases explains how the myelin coverage speed up the conduction of the nerve propagation in the neuron. In addition as well, you can see, since there are regions of the axon that is naked and not covered by myelin sheath, you can see that the action potential jumps from nodes to nodes. So that's greatly speeds up as well the conduction of the action potential till reaching to the terminal of the neuron till conveyed to the other target cell. So you can see here enlarged region of the naked axon that is not covered by a myelin. So most behaviors are controlled by pathway composed of 4 elements. So you have the nervous system majorly composed of 4 elements: sensory neurons that respond to the stimuli, that sense the stimuli. And these sensory neurons respond to stimuli either from inside or outside the body. There are interneurons. These interneurons receive signal from the sensory neurons or hormones or neurons that store memories and many other sources. Then there are the motor neurons, and these motor neurons actually receive instructions from the sensory neurons or the interneurons and either activate a muscle or gland. Then there are the effectors, and the effector as well, either muscles, they can respond by either contraction or relaxation, or glands, they can respond by releasing hormones. These 4 elements, the above 4 elements, the sensory neurons, the interneurons, the motor neurons, the effectors must be connected. These carry out these basic operation that is required by the nervous system. So majorly, they need to determine the type of the stimulus, and these are the function of the sensory neurons, determine and the signal the intensity of a stimulus by the sensory and the interneurons, integrate information from many sources. This is the main function of the interneurons, and to direct the appropriate behavior to the target organs, and this actually coordination between the interneurons, motor neurons, and effectors. So here you can see how a simple example like the reflex arc, which show coordination between all types of neuron as a defense mechanism for any sudden changes to our external behavior. So you can see here, it starts with a painful stimulus that activates a pain sensory neuron in your hand. This signal is transmitted by the pain sensory neuron to the spinal cord in your vertebral column. So you can see here the axon of the neuron. Actually, this is a sensory neuron that conveys the signal of the painful signal from the pain receptor. It is conveyed all over until reaching the spinal cord. The signal here in the spinal cord is transmitted from the sensory neuron to the interneuron and then to the motor neuron. And you can see the motor neuron now leaves the spinal cord, reaches to the muscles, and stimulate the effector organ, which is in this case is the muscles, to contract the muscles, leading to the withdrawal response of our hand. So actually, this is the pain withdrawal reflex, one of the major example of the how our body have a built-in capacity to respond to any changes in our external environment. One of the other examples of our reflex is the eyelid reflex. So normally if a dust particles enter your eye, you will close your eye straight away without any controlling on that behavior, because actually it is a reflex arc. As well as breastfeeding, it is a reflex arc mechanism. So once the nipple of the breast is stimulated, the female start to secrete milk. So here you can see how the organization and function of each different part of the human nervous system. So the nervous system, actually our nervous system consists of a central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system actually consists of brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system consists of motor neurons and the sensory neurons. And we already talked about the function of the sensory and the motor. For the motor neurons, it either affected the somatic nervous system, which control the voluntary action, anything that is controlled by skeletal muscles, okay, somatic, or either control this motor neuron control the autonomous nervous system. For the autonomous nervous system, actually it is controlling the involuntary action, which is mainly controlled by the contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles. For the autonomic nervous system, which is the involuntary action, this affected two major divisions, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. Actually, simply the sympathetic division work in cases like fight and flight, when you run, when you do exercise, and the parasympathetic actually dominate through other stages in our life, like while resting or digesting. But generally, these two divisions majorly are involuntary, okay? The next topic we'll talk about the senses and how we sense different stimulus from the external environment. So how do animals sense their environment? Sensory receptors convert the stimulus from the internal or external environment as an end to an electrical signal, which is called the receptor potential. Okay. So many sensory receptors are in sense organs that help the receptor to respond to a specific stimulus. The receptor potentials result in action potential in specific axons connected to the brain. The intensity of the stimulus is encoded by the frequency of action potential reaching the brain. So that means if the brain senses if the frequency is very fast action potentials, that means it needs to respond vigorously, and low frequency of action potential that will respond with a low action intensity of that the brain senses that the stimulus have lower intensity. That's how we differentiate between a severe pain, a mild pain, and very diminished pain. So how are mechanical stimuli detected? So there are mechanoreceptors that detect the stimuli. What are the mechanostimuli? Can detect what kind of stimuli? Like touch, vibration, pressure, stretch, and sound. All of these are sensed by mechanoreceptors. Some mechanoreceptors, including those for touch and the sensation of itching, are free nerve ending, just a free nerve ending with no specialized sense organs. Other mechanoreceptors detect the pressure and sound or gravity. So here you can see a cross-sectional diagram of the skin. And actually, you can see on the skin that have a lot of different types of receptors. So you can see there is a receptor for light, touch, slow vibration. There is a receptors for rapid vibration, rapid pressure changes, for steady pressure, for touch, heat, cold, and pain. And this figure is for knowledge. So how is temperature sensed? There are a special receptor which is called thermoreceptors, which respond to either cold or warm by increasing the rate of firing. And most of these thermoreceptors as well are free nerve endings in either the skin or the brain. So how the pain is perceived? So pain receptors respond to damaging stimuli such as cuts, burns, acid, or extremely high or low temperature. Some pain receptors also respond to chemicals that are produced by the body during tissue damage, and can respond as well for chemicals that can be on our skin, like something like sulfuric acid, H2SO4, that is poured accidentally on our skin. How are sound, gravity, and movement are detected? This actually the figure for showing the structure of the eye, of the ear, and this figure as well for knowledge. But you need to understand that the vertebrate ear actually consists of three regions. An outer ear, you can see this outer ear, and middle ear, this is the middle ear, you can see, and an inner ear inside your skull. In the vertebrate ear, air vibrates in the tympanic membrane. This is the tympanic membrane vibrates, which transmit vibration into bones of the middle ear. These are the three bones of the middle ear, three bones. And then to the oval window, you can see it moves to the oval window of the cochlea. This which looks spiral, these are the cochlea which looks spiral in the inner ear. So again, the vibration of air is sensed by the tympanic membrane, which conveys the signal to the inner ear, the bones of the inner ear, the bones of the middle ear, which actually are three bones, and this is conveyed to the oval window of the cochlea, which is situated in the inner ear. Of course, this, by the end, this will be by the help of the vestibular system. If the signal is conveyed to the auditory nerve, which connected the ear to the brain. Within the cochlea, as you can see, vibration are sensed by some special types of mechanoreceptor to produce the receptor potential. The receptor potential are transmitted to axons of the auditory nerve, so this will trigger an action potential that travels through the auditory nerve to reach to the brain. So the vestibular system, you can see here, of the inner ear detect majorly three things: the gravity, the orientation of the hair, the orientation of the head, and the movement of the head. How is light perceived? In the vertebral eye, as well, this figure is for knowledge. In the vertebrate eye, light enters the cornea and then passes through the pupil to the lens, which you focus an image on the retina. So you can see here is the cornea, and then the pupil passes into the pupil, and then to the lens, and this lens focus the light entering the eye onto the retina. Here, the retina. The retina actually consists of two types of photoreceptor, which actually, as you can see from the figure, rods and cones. These rods and cones, these actually the cells which produce the receptor potential in response to light. These signal, the receptor potential formed by or produced by the rods and cones, are translated into action potential that is transmitted by the axons of the optic nerve. You can see the optic nerve to the brain. Actually, why we have rods and cones? Rods actually are more abundant and more light sensitive than cones. Basically they provide black and white vision in dim light. While cones, which are concentrated in the fovea, this region, you can see this region is called the fovea, they provide actually the color vision. So cones are responsible for providing the color vision, while rods are responsible for providing the black and white vision in dim light. So here you can see how are chemicals sensed. So in terrestrial vertebrates, they detect the chemicals in the external environment either by smell, olfaction, or by taste, gustation. The olfactory neurons of vertebrates are located in a region called nasal cavity, while the taste receptors are primarily located in the taste buds on the tongues, even in our tongues. This table, which is for knowledge, describes the different categories of receptor, either thermo, mechano, photo, chemo, or pain receptor, the kind of stimulus they respond to, the sensory cell type, and the location where they are located. And you can have it for knowledge. And this concludes our lecture for today. I'm waiting for your questions.